What would you do if the law itself put a living soul on the auction block, chained, bloodied, and sold like cattle beneath the desert sun? Would you turn away with the crowd, or would you risk everything to defy a world that thrived on cruelty? And what if that wild girl you say vowed never to kneel, not even to you? Would you still stand by her, or would you break? The Arizona sun was merciless that afternoon, bleeding gold and fire across the timbered storefronts of Willow Creek. Heat shimmered off the hard-packed earth, and every nail, every wooden beam glowed as if the whole town were burning from within. The street was hushed, except for the restless scuff of boots, the murmur of voices circling like flies. At the center of it all stood a rough wooden platform, and upon it a spectacle no one dared look away from. A girl, no, something wilder than a girl, shackled at the wrists, chin lifted as though the chains were ornaments, not bonds. Her auburn hair was tangled, catching the last light like copper flame. Blood darkened the corner of her mouth, but her eyes, those fierce amber eyes, burned hotter than the desert sky. She was no caged bird trembling at her captors. She was a storm barely held at bay. Josiah Pritchard, the slick-tongued auctioneer, preened beside her, his voice oily with mockery. "Gentlemen, what stands before you ain't no ordinary prisoner. This is a wild creature dragged out of the canyons after stealing and fighting like a she-devil. Took 6 men to drag her down." The crowd answered with uneasy laughter. Women clutched their gloves, scandalized yet unwilling to turn away. Men leaned forward, hunger in their eyes. "Her name?" someone called. Pritchard grinned. "Elena, or so she claims, talks when she pleases, fights like 10 men when riled. County wants rid of her, and tonight she belongs to whoever dares the risk." The gavel gleamed in his hand, poised to strike. Elena turned then, sweeping the crowd with a glare sharp as a blade. When her gaze locked on one man standing apart, a tall rancher with steel-gray eyes and a silence that carried more weight than words, the air itself seemed to tighten, the noise dimmed, the dust hung suspended. In that instant, fate chose its players. Samuel Hayes stood at the edge of the crowd, his hat-brim shadowing eyes that had stared too long at war, at graves, at losses that never healed. 35 years had carved his face with sun and solitude, but nothing in his stillness betrayed the storm clawing inside. He hadn't come here for this. He needed flour, nails, blocks of salt. Yet something in the chained woman's defiance pinned him in place like a nail through timber. Elena snapped her head toward the leering faces, her voice cracking the air like a rifle shot. "I'm no horse, and I'll kill the man who tries to break me." Gasps shivered through the square. Some laughed, others muttered prayers. But Samuel felt the weight of her words settle on him like a brand. Bull Morrison, red-faced and swollen with whiskey, shoved forward. $40, he barked. "She'll match my spirited mares." Elena spat at his boots, and the deputy struck her hard. She stumbled but stood straight, the bruise blossoming across her cheek, only sharpening her fire. Pritchard smirked. "Do I hear 45? Samuel's fist curled. He told himself to walk away, to buy his flour and leave. Yet some old part of him, the part that still believed in protecting what the world would destroy, would not let him move. His boots thudded heavy on the boards as he stepped closer. 100, he said. Voice low, but carrying like thunder across the hush. The crowd gasped. Pritchard's eyes widened. "Mr. Hayes, surely you jest." Samuel tossed a leather pouch of coins to the stage. "Cash." Bull's face purpled. "Now hold on, Hayes." Samuel's gray eyes met his. "Unless you bid higher, she's mine." His hand drifted near his Colt, the weight of reputation hanging in the silence. Bull's courage shrank, and with a curse he spat. "She's yours, but no man alive will tame her." The gavel fell. The chains came off. Elena rubbed her raw wrists, but never looked away from the man who had bought her. "You've bought nothing," she hissed. "I am no man's property." "Never said you were," Samuel answered. "But leaving you here seemed worse than hell. You ride with me, or you stay with them." Her pride battled with survival. At last, chin high, she gave a single nod. "I'll come, but I won't kneel. Not to you, not to anyone. Never asked you to." The crowd parted with reluctant murmurs as Samuel led her through, their whispers like the hiss of snakes. Some muttered pity, others envy, but none dared block his path. At his wagon, he stopped, turning to her. "Can you ride?" "Better than any man here," Elena shot back, pride unbroken. "Good, there's a mare tied behind. She's yours." A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she swung into the saddle with ease, her torn dress catching in the stirrup like banners of defiance. The townsfolk looked on in grim silence, until an old woman's voice rang sharp. "You're a fool, Samuel Hayes. That wildness can't be loved out of a soul." Samuel mounted his black gelding, his words steady, meant for all to hear. "Not trying to love it out? Maybe it doesn't need to come out at all." And with that, the two rode into the dying sun, their shadows long across the dirt road, bound together by chance and something neither yet named. Night fell cold. Coyotes called as Samuel led them to a spring sheltered by cottonwoods. He gathered wood, lit fire, then turned his back, leaving her free to flee if she chose. Elena watched him, jaw tight. "If I ride on, you won't stop me? Push that mare too hard and the desert'll feed you to buzzards," he replied without looking. She lingered, then dismounted, at last. Just for tonight, days blurred into the rhythm of ranch life. At Triple Creek, Elena moved like a restless spirit, hauling water, hauling logs, always watching, never yielding trust. She rose before dawn, worked beside the hands, and though her silence was sharp as barbed wire, she refused to be idle. Samuel gave her space, though his steady gaze followed without pressing. Sometimes she caught his eyes, steel gray meeting amber fire. She glared, daring him to tame her. He never tried. His patience was its own unspoken challenge. The ranch hands were slower to soften. Billy, youngest, stared openly until cuffed by Tom with a mutter about rattlesnakes being safer. Miguel, older, wiser, treated her with quiet respect, offering help only when asked. Slowly, Elena began to ask about horses, about the land, about survival beyond solitude. One evening, Samuel found her at the corral, hands stroking the neck of a nervous Mustang. The horse, wild to others, stood calm beneath her touch. "You've got a gift," Samuel said. "They're honest," she replied sharply. "Fear or trust nothing in between, unlike people." Samuel unlatched the gate, letting the Mustang step free. Elena froze, certain he was mad. But the horse only circled, then settled near the others. "Sometimes," he said, "what you expect isn't what you get." The first true trial came with the storm. At noon, the sky blackened, winds howling across the valley like a host of demons. Dust and grit battered the ranch. Men scrambled to secure animals. Elena was swept into the chaos beside Tom, her lungs burning, eyes stung raw. When the storm struck full, she broke away, disoriented, stumbling blind toward what she thought was shelter. Samuel found her crouched against a rock, arms locked around herself, sand streaking her tear-stained face. He hauled her to her feet, wrapping his coat over her shoulders. "You'll kill yourself running like that," he said, voice stern but not cruel. "I didn't ask you to come," she snapped through chattering teeth. "You didn't have to," he answered. "We look out for each other here." Back at the ranch, Tom scolded harshly, but Samuel only treated her raw skin with gentleness. For once, she sat still, staring at the fire. "I thought I knew the land," she whispered. "Turns out I don't know anything." "You know how to survive alone," Samuel told her softly. "Now you're learning how to survive with others. That's harder." The words lingered, and, though she said no more, something shifted. Days later in the corral, Billy fought a Mustang with rope and shouting. The horse reared, eyes wild. Elena vaulted the fence, her voice cutting sharp. "You're scaring him." She moved slow, steady, whispering. Within minutes, the Mustang trembled, but stood calm under her hand. The ranch fell silent. Samuel, watching from the barn, felt the change. She was no demon of the canyons, but someone who spoke the hidden language of fear. From then, she tried harder than anyone, burning meals, blistering hands, failing, laughing bitterly, and starting again. Tom respected her grit. Miguel taught her to cook without smoke. Even Billy, chastened, treated her like kin. One night Samuel heard her outside, murmuring to the coyotes in a low song. When she realized he listened, she stiffened. "They understand me. So do I," he said simply. Her amber eyes searched him for mockery, but found only truth. For the first time she looked at him not as the man who had bought her, but as someone who might see her as she truly was. Then came the thunder of hooves. 15 riders, torches blazing, led by Jake Morrison, Bull's brother, twice as cruel. He sneered from the yard, "Word is you're keeping something that don't belong to you." Samuel stepped onto the porch, hand resting on his Colt. "Everything here is mine, bought and paid for." "Not her," Jake spat. "She shamed my brother. She's Morrison property by right." Before Samuel could answer, Elena strode forward, knife glinting. "I'm no man's prize. You'll have to kill me first." The yard fell silent, firelight flickering on steel in fear. For a breathless moment the yard held its silence, torches crackling, horses stamping the dirt as if they too sensed the edge of bloodshed. Jake Morrison's sneer widened, but his men shifted uneasily. 15 against 5, but the 5 stood solid. Samuel on the porch, Tom with rifle steady, Miguel with his old buffalo gun, Billy pale yet unflinching, and Elena herself, knife gleaming in her fist. Samuel's voice broke the tension, low and deadly calm. "She's not yours, she's not mine, she's her own. But while she works this ranch, she's under my protection. You want her, you come through me." The torches flickered in the wind. Jake's bravado faltered, though he masked it with a spit into the dirt. "This ain't over. That wild girl'll bring you down." With a jerk of his reins, he wheeled his horse. One by one, the riders followed, their laughter thin and forced. But the poison in Jake's eyes lingered, promising a reckoning. When the dust settled, Elena sagged onto the porch steps, her knife clattering to the boards. She trembled, but did not cry. Samuel lowered himself beside her, careful not to touch. "All right?" he asked. "I should leave," she whispered. "They'll come back. People will die because of me." Samuel shook his head. "They'll come back because Jake Morrison is a coward who hides behind mobs. That's not on you." The others stood waiting for his word. Samuel rose, his voice steady. "We'll prepare. If they return, we'll be ready." Then to Elena, "Quieter. You're not alone anymore. Not unless you choose to be." Her amber eyes lifted, and for the first time since he'd seen her on the platform, something flickered through them besides defiance, something that looked almost like hope. Word spread through Willow Creek faster than wildfire. Some whispered Samuel Hayes had lost his mind, risking life and land for a girl who belonged in chains. Others, especially women who had known cruelty, whispered admiration for Elena's fire. The town itself seemed to split along invisible lines. A week later, Judge Cornelius Blackwood summoned a hearing. The largest barn was chosen, packed wall-to-wall ranchers, drifters, shopkeepers, and the curious alike. Torches burned in sconces, shadows leaping across beams as the murmur of the crowd filled the air. They had come for spectacle, for judgment, perhaps even for blood. Elena entered beside Samuel. She wore a borrowed dress from Tom's late daughter. Hair brushed clean, chin lifted high despite the stares that pierced like needles. Every step was defiance, every glance a challenge hurled at the crowd. Jake Morrison stood near the front, Bull looming at his side, their faces carved with rage. Jake's voice dripped false righteousness. "This girl has stolen, fought, lived like an animal. She's a danger to decent folk. The law must put her where she belongs, behind bars." The barn rattled with mutters until Samuel's voice cut through, iron steady. "She belongs nowhere but where she chooses. The danger here isn't her, it's men who treat her like property." Gasps rolled through the crowd. The judge raised his gavel for silence, his sharp gaze fixed on Elena. "State your name." She stepped forward, her voice clear. "Elena Marchetti, daughter of Carlo and Sophia Marchetti. My family was slaughtered when I was 12. I was taken, sold, escaped. I lived in the canyon 7 years. I stole when I was starving. I fought when men tried to chain me. If that makes me a criminal, then I stand guilty." The barn went silent. Even Jake, struggled for words. Then from the back came a voice, steady and certain. I knew her parents, good people. It was Mrs. Carlson, one of the valley's most respected ranch wives. She's no criminal, she's a survivor. Her words turned the tide. Heads nodded. Murmurs shifted from condemnation to shame. Judge Blackwood leaned forward, eyes like knives. This town disgraced itself when it paraded a young woman on an auction block. If anyone here is guilty, it is those who took part in that crime. His gaze swept the barn, and more than one man dropped his eyes. He struck the gavel once. Miss Marchetti owes restitution for the food she admits to taking. Beyond that, she is free. Any man who claims ownership or raises a hand against her will answer to the law. Jake erupted, red with fury. You can't just let her walk free. The judge slammed the gavel so hard the rafters shook. I can, and I have. Samuel stepped forward, voice like stone. If anyone seeks her again, they'll face me first. The crowd parted as Samuel led Elena out into the daylight. Her hands trembled, but her chin stayed high. For once justice had not chained her, it had set her free. Weeks passed. On the ranch, Elena worked harder than any hand. She cooked with Miguel, learned from Tom, rode the range with Billy. Slowly, the men stopped treating her as an outsider and began to treat her as one of their own. And slowly, almost unwillingly, Elena began to laugh again. One crisp afternoon, a lone rider approached the ranch. Elena froze on the porch, heart hammering. The rider dismounted, and tears sprang hot to her eyes. It was Rosa, her sister, alive after all those lost years. Their embrace was fierce, broken halves made whole again. Rosa's return lit a flame. Elena thought long dead. They sat on the porch steps until dawn, speaking in whispers, remembering their parents, their childhood, the night everything was stolen. For the first time in years, Elena no longer felt like the last of her kind. Samuel watched from a distance, his face carved in shadow. Later, Elena found him by the barn. Her voice trembled. All these years I believed I was alone, but I'm not, am I? No, he said. Not anymore. Seasons turned. When winter's blizzard swept across the valley, Samuel nearly perished driving cattle through the white fury. It was Elena who rode into the storm, hair crusted with ice, dragging him back half dead, saving both man and herd. For nights he burned with fever. She never left his side. When he could finally speak, he took her hand. His voice was raw, stripped of pride. Marry me, not to tame you, not to cage you, but to stand beside you. Her eyes filled with tears. I'll keep my knives. I'd worry if you didn't, he answered with a rasp of laughter. They wed in spring beneath the cottonwoods, Rosa at her side, the ranch hands gathered as witness. Elena wore her mother's silver cross, her wild hair unbound. When Samuel kissed her, the woman once paraded in chains stepped fully into the light of a life she had thought forever denied. But freedom did not mean surrender. Elena never ceased to be wild. She raced mustangs across the pastures, knives flashing in the sunday. She argued with Samuel as fiercely as she loved him, and he never sought to quell her fire. He gave her roots when she needed them, freedom when she demanded it. The town still whispered, though less with each year. Few called her the wild girl anymore. They began to call her something else, Elena Hayes, a woman who had walked through chains, blood, and storms, and built a life untamed, unbroken, as vast and unyielding as the Arizona sky. Spring lingered sweet and restless at Triple Creek Ranch. The cottonwoods whispered with new leaves, the creeks swelled with snowmelt, and the air carried both promise and threat. Elena, now Elena Hayes, rose before dawn with the men, her auburn hair loose in the wind as she saddled her mare. She rode the ranges with Samuel, her laughter rare but startling, like sunlight piercing storm clouds. Yet peace on the frontier was never certain. Whispers came that Jake Morrison had not forgotten his humiliation. Riders were seen on ridges watching. Neighbors warned Samuel that he was courting ruin by sheltering the woman who had shamed the Morrisons. Some offered support, others withdrew. One evening, after branding calves, Samuel found Elena by the fence line, staring at the horizon where storm clouds gathered. "They'll come again," she said quietly. He stepped beside her. "Let them, we'll stand." She turned, eyes blazing. "I won't see your men bleed for me." His hand brushed her shoulder, steady as the mountains. "This ranch stands together. No one fights alone." Days later, the warning proved true. Before dawn, hooves thundered in the distance. Jake Morrison returned not with 15, but with 30 riders, torches blazing, rifles gleaming. They filled the yard like a tide of fire. Samuel stood on the porch, calm as ever, Colt resting at his hip. Elena stepped beside him, knife in hand. Tom, Miguel, and Billy flanked them, joined now by neighbors who had heard the whispers and chosen their side. What had begun as 5 now stood nearly 20 strong. Jake sneered from horseback, torchlight painting his face like a demon. "Still hiding behind this wild witch haze? She'll ruin you." "She's not hiding," Samuel replied. His voice carried like a bell in the night. "She stands with us, and if you cross this line, you'll pay with blood." The yard bristled with rifles cocking, horses snorting. For a long moment the world balanced on a knife's edge, the firelight trembling across steel barrels and hardened faces. Elena's hand trembled around her knife, but she did not step back. She raised her chin, eyes fierce as the desert Sunday. In that stillness she understood Samuel had not bought her to tame her. He had given her a place to stand. And she would stand, even if it meant war. The standoff stretched until every breath felt like thunder. Horses stamped, men shifted fingers on triggers, but Samuel never moved. His silence was heavier than shouting, a wall no threat could breach. At last, Jake snarled, "You'd die for her?" "I'd live with her," Samuel said evenly. "That's harder." The words struck deeper than bullets. For a moment Jake faltered, rage twisting with doubt, but pride shoved him forward. He raised his rifle only to find 20 more barrels glinting back. One squeeze, and the yard would drown in blood. Jake's sneer curdled. He spat, turned his horse, and barked, "Fall back." Relief rippled through the defenders, yet no one lowered their weapons until the last torch vanished over the ridge. Only then did Elena's knees weaken. Samuel caught her arm, steadying her. She searched his face in the glow of dying flames. "They'll return, then we'll be ready," he answered. But inside, he knew Jake's hatred would rot until it burst again. The ranch rebuilt its calm. Days of labor followed, mending fences, tending calves, repairing what the night's fear had broken. Elena worked harder than any, shoulders taut, eyes scanning the horizon as though daring danger to come. At supper she sat with the men, no longer on the edge but at the heart of their circle. Slowly, her laughter began to return, low and unguarded. One evening she rode the pastures alone, wind in her hair, knives strapped to her waist. Samuel watched from the ridge, pride and worry twined in his chest. She was untamed, yes, but not reckless. She belonged to herself, and still she had chosen to belong here. That truth was stronger than chains. When Rosa joined her sister in the fields, their voices carried in song old Italian hymns taught by their mother long before the slaughter. The sound drifted across the valley like a blessing. Men paused at their work, listening in silence, some with heads bowed. Even Samuel, hardened by years, felt something break loose inside him, a reminder that life could be more than survival. That night, by the fire, Elena asked him softly, "Do you ever wish I were gentler, easier?" Samuel looked into the flames before answering. "No. The desert don't ask permission to be fierce. Neither should you." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, but close. "Then perhaps I chose the right man." The fire popped, and silence settled easy between them, not the silence of strangers, but of two souls who had found a rhythm. Summer came fierce and dry. The ranch baked beneath a merciless sun, yet Triple Creek endured. Under Elena's hand, the wild mustangs grew steady. Under Samuel's watch, the herds fattened. What had once been a house divided by suspicion now thrived as a family bound by trust. But the frontier seldom left debts unpaid. Late one evening, as cicadas droned, Samuel spotted a lone rider approaching. It was a messenger from Willow Creek. Jake Morrison had been killed in a drunken brawl, cut down not by Samuel's bullet, but by his own folly. The feud had ended without another shot fired. Elena listened in silence, her face unreadable. Then she exhaled, slow and deep, as though a weight she had carried since the auction finally slid from her shoulders. "So it ends," she murmured. "No," Samuel said gently. "It begins." Life settled into rhythm. Rosa helped Miguel in the kitchen, Tom taught Billy the finer tricks of ranching, and Elena, still restless, rode with Samuel across the endless valleys. Together they drove cattle, faced storms, and laughed at mistakes that once would have broken her spirit. At night she still spoke to the coyotes, her voice weaving through the dark. Once Samuel joined her. "What do you tell them?" he asked. "That I'm free," she whispered, "and that I'll never kneel." He took her hand, rough and scarred like his own. "Good. I married a woman, not a shadow." In town, whispers softened. Shopkeepers nodded respectfully, women smiled without pity, and even the sheriff tipped his hat when she passed. The wild girl became a story. Children whispered at night, half legend, half warning. But those who truly knew her called her Elena Hayes, the heart of Triple Creek. One dusk, as the sky blazed crimson, Elena stood at the fence line watching Samuel ride in. She thought of the day she had stood, chained before strangers, spitting blood and defiance. She thought of the man who had stepped forward when no one else dared. When he dismounted, she met him halfway. "I never thanked you," she said quietly. "You don't owe me thanks," Samuel replied. "Only truth." She pressed her forehead to his eyes, burning. "Then here's my truth. You didn't buy me. You found me. And I found myself beside you." The horizon swallowed the sun, but the light between them did not fade. In the wide silence of the frontier, stories often ended in graves, in forgotten names carved on weathered wood. Yet sometimes, rarely, miraculously, they ended in rebirth. Elena's tale was one such miracle. From chains and scorn she walked into freedom, not because the world chose mercy, but because she chose never to bow. Her wildness, once mocked as ruin, became her strength, and Samuel's steadfastness gave that fire a home where it could burn without destroying itself. The townsfolk who had once gathered to jeer at the wild girl came to see something they could not name, that dignity cannot be sold, cannot be broken, cannot be erased by hunger, chains, or fear. Elena proved that survival is not only the art of resisting, but the courage to trust again after years of betrayal. Samuel proved that love is not conquest, but recognition, the quiet act of standing beside another soul without demanding they change. Together they wrote a different kind of legend, one not born of gunfights or gold strikes, but of endurance, trust, and the fierce belief that no one is beyond redemption. The ranch hands, who once doubted her, grew into brothers. Rosa returned from shadows, wove family back into Elena's life. Even the land itself seemed to accept her, mustangs calming beneath her touch, coyotes answering her midnight song. The desert, cruel and honest, had finally given her back to herself. And for those who listened, the lesson lingered. Strength is not measured in how tightly one can hold the reins, but in knowing when to let another run free. Love is not the taming of storms, but the willingness to stand in their path and endure. Freedom is not granted, it is claimed again and again in every choice to rise rather than kneel. So when travelers rode through Willow Creek and asked after the wild girl, the townsfolk no longer whispered in pity or fear. They pointed to the horizon, where a woman rode with her hair unbound, knives at her side, laughter on the wind. They told them her name was Elena Hayes, and that she had once been caged, but now lived untamed proof that even in a world built on chains, the human spirit could not be broken.